Right, well, as everyone slowly makes their way in, we've got a big contingent from Durban and Peter Maritzburg. So, excellent. Brakpan, Hillcrest, and I saw there was actually some people in the chat who from further afield. I saw someone in the chat from somewhere far. Where was that? Nigeria. Right, so obviously not everyone just into the word cloud just yet, but keep you warming, keep your brain up. Okay, hand on heart. Are you wearing your PJs right now? You know what it's like. You know, this is the wonder of being able to do things on Zoom. So never 100% yes. Was it just all business on top? PJs at the bottom, or you just took them off a minute ago. Right, so remember, full honesty, full confession. Let's see what people are saying. All right, here we go. Let's find out the honest truth. 67% never. Well, we've got a quarter of those who've replied. We've got the PJs on the bottom and a few just took them off. Okay. I was actually thinking of starting a webinar series. I called this one Behind the Screens, but my first idea was to call it, you know, Teachers in Pajamas, because why not? You know, it's fun that we can all get be as comfortable as we want. You've just got to look okay from this part up. So that's all that really matters. Right, so half the people, never. But hey, nearly half of you actually, yeah, why not? Quick little quiz before we get going. Get your brain cells warmed up. So you're going to get a chance to join it. Very important to everything that I do when it comes to teaching online is about being active. It's very important, and it's part of those who've worked with me and been to Activated Academy will know it's all about having active pedagogies, active teaching approaches. So I want us to be active from the get-go, and then we're going to get into some really active conversation with Stephen and Tracey around reimagining education. Right, let's just have a quick quiz to activate the brain. What is the world's largest river by volume? Right, so you only got a few more seconds left. You've got 10 seconds to get in your answer. Is it Congo, the Yangtze, the Amazon, or the Nile? The world's largest river by volume. All the geography teachers quickly going, too easy, too easy. All right, here we go. 1 second left. And let's see how you did. And 92% saying Amazon and 8% saying Nile. And the correct answer, of course, is Amazon. All right, well done to those who got that right. And in fact, Stephanie, fastest at the top with Logan, the top three, and Gwen, Christy, and Shireen. In one word, how would you describe teaching this year? If you had to use one word, what has teaching been like this year? Let's see what people are saying. One word to describe your teaching experience this year. Interesting. Yeah, interesting. I think it's a great word to describe it. Goes either way. Challenging, absolutely. Chaos, yeah, one of my favorite sort of words. Interesting. Crazy, challenging. But then also other bizarre, experimental, exhausting. Wow. How else can you put it? Unique, scary, frustrating. And yeah, my power's just come back on. So I should have put there, my word would have been load shedding. So I'm very grateful. I was watching my computer, my laptop slowly work its way down as the battery slowly decided to get near the end. My power's back on. Right, so that's our little word cloud. Another quiz question. Get your brain ready, your thumbs quick. Remember, if you go faster, you get more points and it makes you the winner. Here we go. Get ready for the next one. Which planet is fourth from the sun? Mars, Earth, Mercury, or Jupiter? Quickly get it in, quickly. Oh, look at the answers flying in there. A few seconds left. Get it in. Is it Mars, Earth? Do you remember back in, was it Jupiter, Mercury, Jupiter, Earth? Was Earth the closest? Very tricky, very deep questions. As you got 1 second left, and the correct answer, we have 50% saying Mars, 38% saying Mercury, and even some, we got a spread here. And the correct answer, of course, is Mars. Right, I will teach you all Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. And the rest are I should pick on Stephen or Blewett. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Okay, I'm not going to put our panelist on the spot there. Right, the leaderboard after our second question. Gwyn holding up the top there with Kristen and Christy. Top 3. Right, let's see, is there another one? Oh, yes, last question. This is a real brain teaser. What does vexology study? If you're a vexillologist, are you into stamps, flags, word origins, or viruses? Yeesh, yeesh. Right, that's a particularly interesting one. And we've got a spread there with flags and word origins, some saying stamps. I know one of our panelists is interested in one of these things, but let's see, the correct answer is flags. That's what vexillologists do. Who would have known? Okay, but Christy holding the leaderboard at the top, 3 out of 7. Right, well done. Okay, so officially, I just want to now welcome you all to the Behind the Screens Reimagining Education webinar. Thank you everyone who's come and has joined us. I can see still more people are coming as we get going, so lovely to have you all here. And also a special welcome to our 2 panelists, Stephen and Tracey, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in a moment. But what I wanted to do is, before we get going, is I want to show you a couple of images that I thought are particularly interesting. Around about 120 years ago, a group of French artists were commissioned to draw what they thought the world would look like at the year 2000. So if you really look really close at that, at the very top, you'll see it says End Land 2000. And so this is literally 100 years ago. So this is the 1880s or 1890s, I think they did this. And they had to try and put their brains forward to think, what is the world going to look like around the year 2000? And so they came up with a variety of images around education, business, entertainment, etc. And to share just a couple with them. So here's the first one. They imagined that we would be sharing croquet parties underneath the ocean. Okay, very good. You have considered that one. So what I want to know is that a good prediction? The croquet parties underneath the ocean. You've got an option of, yes, it's spot on. It's sort of accurate, not really accurate, or it missed the mark. Now, you've got to guess what I guessed that was. This is the challenge. Okay, what do you think I would have said that was? And your answers are in. Lol, this missed the mark. It's spot on. Who said spot on? You guys played croquet parties under the ocean? Well, I thought that missed the mark. I have not once played croquet under the ocean. Okay, how about this one? This one was a prediction that, it was entitled The Rural Postman, but it was a prediction that, items would be delivered by some person sitting on a flying thing. So that's how you would get your goods delivered in around the year 2000. So what do you think about that one? Is that a spot on prediction? Sort of accurate, not really accurate, or lol, this missed the mark? What do you think about that one? The man delivering goodies sitting on top of the flying beast. Right, just a few seconds left, get it in. And let's see what people thought. Okay, sort of accurate, saying most of it, spot on. Yeah, that's what I went through. I thought that was actually not too bad. That was sort of accurate. Look at this. You look at what's happening now with drone delivery. Maybe it's not a big thing yet in South Africa, but in some countries it is, that items are now being delivered by drones. So that's pretty impressive. That 100 years ago, they saw that sort of concept. And yeah, that's been amazingly accurate. What about this one? I'm not even going to comment on it. You can just look at it, see what they're doing. They're sitting there, they are communicating, and they've got like a shiny projector thing, and they're talking to that lady over there. So considering that one, what do you think? Is that spot on, sort of accurate, not really accurate, or missed the mark? They're all sitting there having a communication with that shiny little device. What do you think about that one with just 5 seconds left? And answers are in. Yeah, 67% saying spot on. I actually thought that was pretty amazing because that's exactly what we're doing right now. That was Zoom. I mean, they predicted essentially communication with a sort of projector. So they had it shining on the screen, but essentially that is what Zoom communication was. And so to me, that was pretty amazing in terms of you had to try and get spot on. That was pretty much spot on in terms of what was available. Right, I want to finish with this one. Because it's going to segue into what we want to talk about. This was the prediction of schooling today. They drew a picture of what school would look like today. Okay, so what do we have happening here? We have some kids sitting on desks and they've got little wires attached to their head. And if you've traced the little wire, it goes all the way around to a machine. And there's the machine and the teacher is putting books in. Some kids busy grinding the books and the book's content. The idea would be the content would go up the wires and into the kids' heads. So that's the picture of school today that they predicted. What do you think? Is that a good prediction? That content is essentially ground up somehow and transferred into the brain of our students. 3 seconds left. Right, let's see. Yeah, interestingly, we've got about, what, nearly 80% of you, if not higher, saying that's actually not a bad prediction. Yeah, and that's what I would have thought. I thought that was actually pretty sort of accurate. So at the end of all of that, Logan. Logan, jump around and dance. Come on here, you. Okay, well done, Logan. Christy second and Gwen third. Right, so I just wanted to put to those because it's not always easy to imagine the future. I did think the image of what those French artists saw the world looking like today is both a scarily real portrayal and also a rather sad portrayal. Because in some ways that the view of education being something that you just grind up and put into someone's head in a lot of ways has persisted. But the other side of it is the content that information and knowledge is disseminated via some sort of wires, some sort of digital channel. And that's exactly, again, what we're doing here. We've just been through online teaching and learning. So in a way, that's what was happening. Although the interesting thing I think about that picture, if you can remember it, is actually the only one who was really doing anything was the poor kid who was doing the grinding. And so he was probably getting the most benefit out of everything. So let's us now introduce our panelists, Tracey and Stephen. And I'm going to stop my screen share here so that we can all become on big screen again and get our conversation going around this topic. What I want to do very quickly is, if I can find my notes that I have. Right. So firstly, a big thank you to my two panelists for joining us, and just very quickly to tell you a little bit about them. Tracey Munro, she is studied all over the world. She studied in Wits, and then she also studied in the University of Notre Dame in the United States of America, where she did a Master of Science. She's currently at Epworth School, and she's been involved in teaching for 22 years in various roles. And she's been the subject head of mathematics and academic head of department and deputy head. And interestingly, I asked her something interesting about her. Well, not only is she a stamp collector, but she is an avid gardener, and particularly in terms of indigenous gardening. And we're going to see why this is interesting just now when we talk about Stephen. All right. So I'm not going to delay any more. I'm going to hand over to Tracey and just give her a couple of minutes just to talk a little bit about herself and her experiences recently. And after that, I'll introduce Stephen and he'll do the same. And then we will start to have a bit of a conversation around some of what they've said and where the future of education is headed. Right. So over to you, Tracey. You can unmute yourself and you should be good to go.
Thank you very much, Craig. And thank you so much for putting this series of webinars together. Just by way of introduction, I suppose it's good to just sort of paint the scenery, and you can see that I'm sitting in my office at Epworth. Epworth is an independent school in Maritzburg. We are 123 years old this year, and we write the IEB exams. We are situated between the Berg and the sea, which is absolutely ideal in Maritzburg, and we consist of a co-educational prep school and then also a high school for girls. And I'm the deputy of the high school, one of the deputies, so the focus on academics. And I think we can all agree that every school, regardless of where you are on the continuum of technology use in education, that we've all had to very quickly respond and adapt. And even if you were incredibly far along that journey, and that's fundamentally because we're accustomed to having our teachers and pupils in the same space. And suddenly you're not in the same space, and therefore how you're going to adapt. And I thought it's important just to paint sort of a bit of a picture in terms of background before moving to what comes next in reimagining education. And so certainly our philosophy at Epworth is very much to use technology to enhance learning and not to allow it to rule us. And so we don't expect all our pupils to have devices. We do have computer rooms, media centers, iPad banks, and so everything that everybody would need, and they can obviously engage with that in various ways. An example of which would be our teachers create really fabulous workbooks, and pupils can actually choose whether they want to engage with those digitally or in hard copy or both. And so we very much sort of cater to the individual in terms of where they're at and where they'd like to be. And so, yes, that sort of gives you just a bit of background there. We'd certainly investigated a number of online platforms, but we weren't quite ready to sort of jump 100% into one particular platform. And so what we rather decided to do was to engage with MS Teams, and we did this kind of fairly strategically and just by planting a seed. And I'll just paint this picture for you, sort of a visual for you. You can imagine teachers in a bi-weekly staff IT training session, and saying that actually every second week we send out some reports to parents in terms of pupil academics. And obviously that takes a fair amount of collation in terms of gathering comments from staff. And that if I'm dealing with 10 pupils, I'm dealing with at least 130 sort of emails or some form of information being shared with me. And so to make it much easier, why don't we give Teams a try? And so we sit down together and we show them how to use Teams, and right there and then we create our bi-weekly report for that week, and everybody can see how amazing it is. Straight away, it's saving as you work. You can see other people's input and how nice, because before it was sort of quite individual, and now they can get see exactly what everybody else is saying about a particular pupil. And within moments, staff are starting to say, well, why don't we use this for the daily notice? Oh, I can see how we can use this in the maths department, the calendar, etc. And so this really lovely, organic, fluid kind of development. And obviously from just a very positive space, not intimidating at all, and where people are they buy into it really easily because it's their ideas, and from one sort of very tangible application, they can then see how they can make use of it. And so that was really great. And just before people even realized it, and I don't think they even have, there was great change happening. And that was just a really interesting way for change to happen. And before they knew it, as I say, their day-to-day running of the school was already happening through Teams and in a collaborative manner like that. And of course, we always have those members of staff that like to fiddle and go and play with other things and are curious. And so before long, they were saying, hang on, we can use this really nicely for teaching in our classes. And so I said, perfect, present that at the next IT training. And so that's then what we did. And so then staff were going, okay, yes, I'm going to give this a try. And we were more or less in that space where we had a good number of staff engaging with using Teams as a platform for teaching. And of course, yes, quite literally COVID landed in South Africa, in Hilton, a community just up the road from Epworth. And before we knew it, we had just a couple of days that we needed to do online teaching, a 3-week holiday, which was great because that enabled people to prepare online resources. But in their minds, they were only preparing for a week. Because if you took that initial lockdown phase, that's really what we were looking at, was just a week. And so that all is quite exciting. And although it kept the staff quite busy and they didn't have probably nearly as much holiday as they should have, and I think just the angst of living through COVID, the unknown, a pandemic, level 5 lockdown, obviously that does take its toll too. But yes, they took on that week, but before we knew it, in fact, of course, it was 8 weeks, 9 weeks, and 10 weeks. Obviously not an easy space in which to work and where the goalposts keep moving. You can imagine as teachers, I think we can all understand this, that you sort of start off with then assessments that are maybe more informal, fun, activities, surveys, and now you start to think, but now hang on, okay, I need some of that more formal testing. And so then you start to think about how you're going to do that. And obviously with 1 or 2 weeks, you don't fuss because, oh, then we're going to be back at school and we can do it as normal. And of course, that just never came to be. And so then you start to look at exam.net, at a whole lot more open book tests. Yeah, and you just engage with assessment in a different way. Certainly teaching, we had to obviously, take on development of resources quite quickly, and those range from people doing live lessons to through Teams to sort of voice over PowerPoint, YouTube, private settings and all that sort of thing. So yeah, that was obviously kept us rather busy creating all of those. And I suppose maybe just to stop at this point and just to say that it was just so interesting to see that we've had sort of engaged with so much change in a fairly short space of time, and one that was really very, as I say, kind of fluid, organic, and another absolutely thrust upon us. And both being really positive at the end in terms of the progress that we've made, but obviously the one where it's thrust upon you, definitely more discomfort and chaos to begin with. But in the end, amazing progress made, and I think that's a really good thing. Yes, I suppose let me just look at my notes a little bit. I suppose just to say that in terms of synchronous and asynchronous online teaching, we in fact went with a blend. And that's just because, recognizing and understanding your community is important in terms of the pupils and the situation in which they are working from home. And, synchronous learning is fabulous, but that works when everybody has a device, has really good connectivity, and basically uncapped, Wi-Fi. And we know that in our community that is not the case. And certainly because also we hadn't forced that situation. We hadn't needed to. But of course, yes, looking forward and reimagining education, that's something for us to look at a bit differently. And so, yes, our teachers have always worked in grades, and so we certainly streamlined in terms of creating resources, and that makes sense. And so we didn't duplicate work and obviously playing to teachers' strengths. We also felt it was important to recognize and to kind of carry on with our philosophy in that we obviously you always have work schemes, plans, things like that, but you never stipulate exactly what happens in a classroom in terms of each teacher being their own individual and the way that they want to teach and the way that they want to engage with the pupils is incredibly important. Just as you don't want to sort of have a sausage machine for children in education, you don't want to do the same for staff and to box them. And so, yes, we obviously left quite a lot of freedom and there was quite a lot of excitement too amongst the chaos as people kind of mastered new skills, could do new things. We'd obviously were in contact all the time as people learned new things, discovered, we'd share that, help everybody. So basically, as you went along each week, you develop more and more skills. And that was obviously an exciting space to be as we, all taught one another new things. There were obviously lots of webinars, lots of articles to read. And so, yes, one would be gaining lots of insight in terms of what was out there happening. And that's across the world, which was exciting. And then, of course, it was also important to pick up on relationships because it isn't just about delivering content. And I think at first, when you're in that crisis emergency situation, that's what you do. You kind of go, right, we've got to get that work across and the children mustn't fall behind. And then you go, but hang on, we're not just about that. Education is so much more than that. And of course, then you start to make sure that you're engaging that with the pupils, that they're engaging with you. And of course, that can happen in so many different ways. And you want to keep that exciting. You want to make sure that there's lots of good feedback, project-based learning, surveys, activities, personal emails, WhatsApp, lots more phone calls between pupils, parents, and I think that goes a very long way. I certainly found that because yes, WhatsApp emails, that's great, Teams messages, but it's good to be really personal and to connect in that way. And I think that's important during that kind of time because people can feel very isolated. And also, of course, you don't want everything just to be about typing on a computer. So we found it important to continue to do art. I know there was lots of talk on, stripping the curriculum, get, down to the basics, just, keep it quite simple. But in fact, we felt it was incredibly important that our pupils were doing art. And obviously, you could use the art almost as a kind of therapy in how they were managing with lockdown. And obviously really nice, not just to be, as I say, typing on a computer, creating, and you simply just take photographs of those and send them through. Drama, monologues being recorded, orals, and you really wanted people to be engaged and busy, and often it drew the rest of the family in as well, which was a good thing. Obviously physical wellness, mindfulness, making sure there was still space for chapel, just to be able to connect. And kind of still maintain that ethos of your school is incredibly important. That sense of community, that even though we're sort of far apart, we're actually still all together and can connect. I suppose, yes, some of the challenges were certainly connectivity. And so that was important to be able to have recorded lessons, often just one device, laptop being shared. I mean, children pretty much have phones, but it's hard to do your whole schooling all through a phone, and so other kinds of devices, tablets, laptops are important to have. And so that's why you had to make sure that we varied things. That's important in teaching, but it also was important with our community to take into consideration what they were working through. We even had situations where an elder sibling where both parents are healthcare workers, and so the elder sibling in fact had to look after the younger siblings. And it actually helped them with their online teaching in the morning. And so they could only then do their learning in the afternoon and into the evening. Those sorts of situations. And people with sort of very far afield on farms and things, and with very poor connectivity. And so we had to be pretty creative in how we had to make sure that basically you left no pupil behind, and connecting with them all the time to see where they were. We had to be a lot softer in terms of deadlines, and just a lot more understanding of where people were at. So definitely required the sort of individual touch. Of course, then we started to return to school, and everybody would think, all right, great, back to school. But in fact, being back at school has been harder, and much harder, I think, than what the staff thought, pupils thought, and the parents as well. And that's just because we haven't come back to school as normal with all the COVID protocols. And I think it's interesting just because we actually spoke earlier, Craig, Stephen and myself, about what we do, what each of our schools are doing. So maybe it is good to actually mention, because we are all doing such different things. So we in fact have our grades blocked. And we're lucky enough, so we had to just rethink every venue in our school. So you didn't worry about what label it previously had. It was simply a space, simply dimensions, and how many pupils could fit into those spaces with the correct physical distancing, etc. And so, yes, we were very lucky in that we could block and sort of dedicate 5 classrooms per grade, and it worked out really well with our subject choices, lines, etc. To be able to do this. And so our teachers, in fact, moved to the pupils. There's very little movement between the pupils, and then it's actually just within certain grades. Obviously, staggered lunches, staggered teas, and different kinds of duties that we need to do with all the sanitization and really overseeing classes. Previously senior classes could be on their own to carry on with work if we had a sick member of staff, but that isn't the case now. And often then a sick member of staff still actually, in fact, streams live into the classroom. And so then you have someone in the classroom to make sure and to facilitate that. So those kinds of things. Also webcams in the classrooms to make sure that we can stream live to the pupils at home. The idea there being that we would save the staff from having to prep, double prep, sort of do online resources and be teaching in the class. And certainly they like that idea, but it comes with its stresses as well. As you move from class to class, slightly different IT setup. And then also teachers, amazingly enough, do not like to be on camera and to be recorded. And they like to be very much upfront and sort of, yes, are very comfortable in their own spaces and classrooms, but yeah, recording is, they get shy. They're definitely camera shy, and I'm one of those as well. So I can fully appreciate that. But we've even, and obviously just to point out too, we did think it was important to record the lessons as they happened, because the pupils at home, of course, suffer from FOMO. That even if you put online resources, post those in Teams, they're going, but hang on, what if they had some discussion in class that I've missed out on, and that was key and is going to be in a test? So best, make sure that I'm hearing everything that happens, and they can be a part of the class discussions. Of course, that's also quite challenging too. It sounds very straightforward, but IT, servers, load shedding, all those fun things make it quite exciting. And yes, and then I suppose to say something else we've even had to do is have microphones in the classroom. When you've got staff wearing masks and shields to be able to project in these large venues, perhaps that's not their natural way of conducting themselves. And so yes, and that's also not a comfortable space for everybody. We don't all sort of talk behind a microphone normally. And so we've ended up being incredibly blended. Still, so when you go into teach now, you will have, yes, the children will have devices on the desks, but there's also obviously books, and you can definitely get the sense of the blended environment in which we're working. So we've not moved away from Teams. It just makes so much sense. We've obviously really used to working with it. If we still have pupils that are off, that makes absolutely good sense. And then also just in terms of marking, of reducing the spread of COVID, it makes sense to still upload assessments that can be uploaded to Teams and to do that. I suppose, yes, just another sort of interesting thing is that families that could share devices at home, because of the system that we'd set up, now of course, if you have two daughters in the school, each actually needs a device. And so, yes, there's certainly families that actually could survive lockdown with one laptop. For the children now, in fact, each child needs one. And so, yes, certainly from 2021, all of our grade 8s that will be a requirement now for them to have laptops. And obviously it was something we were getting to, but we were phasing it in slowly, but now we have to pick up with that pace. And just another example of why it's so important, and the progress that we've made, is that we did have a landfill fire in Maritzburg. I'm sure that it made the news, and it certainly was seen from outer space, so I'm sure it did. And the pollution was hectic. Obviously, we had to send everybody home. And I mean, within an hour of everybody leaving, online learning continued, and the life sciences grade 11 class wrote their test that was scheduled, their control test, by exam.net. And certainly when we've ever had the landfill, set alight in the past, that was not an option. And we had to stay closed for 4 days, and it really just didn't make any impact at all in terms of education. And that's just because of what we've been through and the progress that we've made. And I think we have to understand that there's just always probably going to be something that we need to contend with. And so, it is exciting. As I say, different ways of change happening, and it can be rather stressful, but exciting too. I suppose, yes, just a couple of sort of take-home things. Teachers and pupils are actually amazingly resilient and adapt to change really well. And I think that really comes from, especially from the teacher's point of view, just an absolute love, dedication, and a passion for what they do. And so, although it was a scary place for many of them to be, they did not hesitate to jump in and try new things, because they just know how incredibly important it is. And obviously, especially with the grade 12s. Something else that was really interesting, I suppose, yes, mental health and how important that's become. It always has been important, but I think that's come to the fore. Also interesting to see pupils, and for a variety of reasons, that really thrived online. Yes, that's been an interesting space to observe, and I think we need to harness that and look at why and how, and use that going forward. I do believe the grade 12s probably suffered the most in all of this, losing out on so many things, events, opportunities to demonstrate their leadership at school, just so many different things. And even though we're back at school now, because of the way we blocked, very much against sort of the Epworth way, if I can say, we're very much an integrated school across our grades. And so for them to exist in these bubbles is not a normal space for them. But at the same time, we have certainly prepared them, I think, very well for life after school. And that independent work, that taking responsibility, just the nature of how you submit assignments at university, do work at university, you know, we've mimicked that pretty closely. And so, in fact, that the pupils will certainly be better off in that way. And then I think, yes, basically, we will never go back. You can never go back after this. We have done it, I think, for long enough. Those, I think, is it 10,000 hours you've got to do for the new habit. And we have done those, more than done that. And now it's a matter of looking forward to see how we make the most of what we've learned, but then also to look to our schools, what their values are, the ethos, and then how we get these to work together. You know, we work from a place of creating young women of worth, or at least, you know, fulfilling their potential so that they are young women of worth. And yes, how that now plays into 21st century skills and just into use of technology so that we can still keep that. You know, there's so much more, and I think if you ask children what they remember about school, it's not really about the curriculum and the content that they've learned, it's everything else that goes with it, it's the experiences. And so it's to make sure that we can capture and still keep those experiences for them in terms of their school career. Thank you. I'll leave it there for now.
Right, thank you, Tracey. I'm taking furious notes because there's so many fascinating things you said, and I'll pick up on some of them later. But I do think just one little takeaway before we switch across to Stephen is that there is no doubt in my mind, you talk about the 10,000 hours. You know, if there was ever going to be a huge social experiment around education and what it would be like if we became more technological in it, because that's been my passion for years. I've been waving this banner, often fruitlessly. Well, now no one had a choice. And so and what was amazing is we all now had to try it. And we've understood the good and the bad and the things that you just talked about, being flexible, the emotional side of it, how you've got to evolve. It's been an unbelievable, in a sense, social experiment. And now it's going to be, well, what do we do with this? You know, and I think we'll carry on with that conversation because you started to basically say, it's not going to be school as usual. There's just no going back because the next COVID is coming, whether that be a fire in a waste disposal thing, whether it be whatever, we can't afford to suddenly be in the same situation again. And I think none of us ever want that, you know. So for that reason and for the positive reason, I think things have changed. So thank you very much for that. And I will pick up on some of your things you said later. Right, we're going to hand across now to Stephen. And I just very quickly, a little bit about him. He has been in education for 25 years. You wouldn't believe it looking at him. Hardly looks like he's you know, left university a few years ago.
Brilliant.
he studied in UNISA and Rhodes and various other places, taught everywhere. He's done the full St. Rounds, St. Benedict's, St. Peter's, St. Andrews, and he's now currently at Thomas More College. He was involved early on in adoption of technology, so he's always been a keen tech person at some of those schools. And now he's currently Senior Deputy Headmaster at Thomas More, and he's passionate about modern approaches to teaching, and I was involved with him for quite a few years back. And he's always been looking to try and push the agenda of how do we make teaching and education more exciting. He's in a teaching family. He's got 3 kids and a wife who's a math teacher. So obviously all they do when they come home, they just talk education, 24/7, poor kids. Interesting. His interests include reading, walking. He's an active member of his church. And Tracey won't be interested in this. He attempts to grow vegetables hydroponically. So Tracey, with her green fingers and the indigenous gardening, you guys can connect afterwards and talk about the latest techniques. Right. So I'm going to hand over to Stephen to tell us a little bit of where he's at and what's happening in his part of the world and his thinking around this education new era. So do you want to share your screen there or?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. And just thanks very much, Craig, for setting this up. I certainly watched the last webinar that you sent us, and I learned a huge amount from how other people and other management structures are dealing with COVID, and of course how they're putting this online program together. So yeah, I've just prepared a few slides. So if I can just put my slides up there, just as a way of going.
While Stephen's doing that, just a quick mention, everyone. If you do have questions, you can just pop them in the Q&A, and I'll try and get to as many of those as we can. So if you've got questions that you want to share with anyone, you'll see this little Q&A. Try and put them rather in the Q&A than in the chat. The chat's for general chat, at least in the Q&A I can see when we've dealt with them. And then we'll try and pick up as many of those as we can. Right, so over to you, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Craig. So yeah, I've just included this little slide as I like graphics. Graphics help me to think about what I'm talking about. But so at Thomas More, we've had this opportunity to try and launch ICT and technology, and I put the cell phone and the tablet there because we started with this bring your own device, and it was sort of an on and off start that kept going on because Craig, you'll remember back in the day where I tried to get my whole staff to go through the triangle, go through the pedagogy, because the big problem for us was that every time somebody arrived on our doorstep, they wanted to sell us a new app or a new tablet or whatever, but there was no thinking about what are we going to do with it and how do we do it properly with teaching, and have we thought about the method in which we're going to use this? Because we've learned that technology doesn't replace the teacher, it just enhances the teacher. So a good teacher is always a good teacher, and technology just makes you a better teacher, or if you're a bad teacher, it just doesn't do anything for you. So we've got this stop-start, and we started with bring your own device. But often what happened with me is, pushing this with the staff, they'd say to me, oh, but it's okay, I've still got my printed notes, or I've got this, and there wasn't an urgency. Well, from the 27th of March, did we not know about the urgency and the absolute necessity to do this? And so, you mentioned it, Craig, you've been waving this flag. And Tracey also mentioned the fact that she had some curious people on staff who were always willing to try things. Yeah, and so we've also had those kinds of pioneers on our staff. And so they were able to do things. And of course, 27th of March hit. These were the flag bearers. These are the people running forward. And often these were the same teachers that were helping those of us who were struggling. And that was hugely helpful, having done some training in the past. The big thing for me, the takeaway for me from this whole thing is that teachers are adaptable. Now, Tracey mentioned that some of us don't enjoy being in front of the camera. It is actually something you would be quite brave about. It's a paradigm shift. You've got to get in front. And so, this is just a picture of me, and I teach grade 8 design and technology. Well, we continued to build bridges, and I was very chuffed that Tracey mentioned that too, that we didn't stop art and, in our case, EGD, we carried on with that. But teachers were incredibly adaptive. And the other thing that starts to happen, of course, is that in those early days, you're just simply mimicking everything that you were doing, because you just haven't found the new ways. And our marketing departments, they were going crazy. I mean, on the left-hand side, just as Craig mentioned earlier, just from the top half, that's all you've got to look good as. And that was me, and that's how I taught. I even taught with a tie on. Can you believe it? I mean, that was, that's what I'm used to doing, so I carried on doing that. The tie didn't last forever. The marketing department put together music videos and whatever, and we all had to write a few lyrics. And then, I think the marketing department was also trying to show parents, hey, look, we're doing something. We're actually out there. So that was one of them. On the right-hand side, you see me there doing an assembly. I used to do an assembly every Friday, and I continued with that. And in fact, I even made the kids dress in their uniforms. And that was in the old days when everybody wanted to see their faces and they had their ties on, and it was all great fun. And Tracey mentioned this too, the matrics, my heart just bleeds for those matrics. There's been no first team sport. There's been no plays. There's been no debates. Our matrics have lost out so much. So it was trying to keep that going. and trying to keep that relationship going. So yeah, we are adaptable and very versatile. And Trace mentioned a couple of things there too. The previous webinar that I watched mentioned that 2020 should be the year of the teacher. I couldn't agree with that anymore. I really think that it should be. But just on funny videos, you know, I just think that one that St. John's DSG in Maritzburg put together on their Facebook with all the things that could go wrong with teaching online. I thought that was brilliant. It really captured lots of the experiences that we were having too, because you try and just mimic what you're doing in the classroom and it's not the same. But of course, in those early days, you are really doing emergency remote teaching. So you're just scrambling and finding just about anything that you can do. And so then, different to what Tracey said, we decided on one platform. I know Tracey said you went eventually with Teams, but we went with Google Classroom. And you can see that's just a plethora of the classes that I'm part of. And also we then got grade classes going as well, so we could communicate with the grade through the grade coordinators. And bottom left became one of the most important ones. That's the high school staff. Now, we had various people that we appointed to assist because they became those pioneers I spoke about. They'd find out something new, and then they'd post it on Google, and you would be at home struggling with maybe trying to do attendance in your Google Meet, and you'd go over to that Google Classroom, and somebody would have found it, and you would look through their video, and you'd watch what they'd done to try and figure out. And a negative of this is that your phone rings the whole time, or at least it's sending you those notifications. So every time somebody sends through an assignment or whatever, you get it. I know you can turn these things off, but as the teacher, you don't want to turn it off because that new word asynchronous started to become a big factor for us. We realized that as our children's clocks, their biological clocks were being pushed out, they'd be going to bed much later and waking up much earlier. And so their work wasn't happening at the same time that we were expecting it. Also, same situation as many other schools. We've got families that are sharing one or two computers. So often the matrics was prioritized and they would use that. And then, the grade 8s or grade 11s down would use it later if they were part of the same family, meaning that their work would be done at different times. And, it became almost a norm, especially in that hard lockdown, for us to be getting emails late in the evening or even on Sundays, and to the point eventually that the headmaster had to write a letter and say to everyone, look, parents, please, the teachers are just being bugged late at night and we just can't keep up. And that certainly helped, and we engaged the children just to try and give us some sleep time because we were sort of missing out on our sleep. But we definitely went with Google Classroom. We've been super happy with that. That's really worked for us. And of course, the Google Drive, sharing documents, those sorts of things have been helpful to us. Yeah, I think one of the big challenges, probably for all of us, but certainly here at school, was getting everybody data. That became a critical issue for us. And there were some families that couldn't afford data, or we'd have everything was working really well until about the 20th of the month. And then we would notice that we would start losing students because obviously data packages started to run out. Within the school, our own staff battled with this too, because suddenly you have to change your spending habits and you've actually got to buy data. Some of our staff didn't have fiber and fiber wasn't in their area. So we really struggled around this area quite a lot. And I've included the WhatsApp symbol there because that became our bedrock. We were amazed that most of our students landed up with contracts that gave them sort of many megabytes free of WhatsApp. And so that became something where if a kid couldn't get onto the Google Meet or couldn't get on their Google Classroom, you often would be holding your phone literally and showing them or videoing something and then sending it to them. And that was all free on their side. So teachers were often doing 3 or 4 times the amount of work because they weren't just presenting this once. They then had to take cognizance of who did and who didn't have Wi-Fi, and often the WhatsApp, was the one that sort of helped us there. So we're sort of moving back now into school, and I've included this here. Tracey's mentioned it too, but we have staff who are ill or staff with comorbidities, and so that means they can't teach in the classroom. So similar to Tracey, we've got our teacher who's in another classroom, away from students or at home. And their job is to teach. And in this particular photograph, I'm actually the teacher assistant here. And Tracey, this is a maths teacher here. And we've got a microphone in there so that everybody can hear. And I've got my laptop and I can see the class. and I'm walking around. But at the same time, top right, you then got the online students. We still have, interestingly enough, in our grade 9s, that's the biggest number of online students. Other grades have come in more quickly, but the grade 9s seem to be holding out. It's something that we've spoken about in our local area here in the Kloof area, and other schools have experienced that too. Maybe it's just the grade 9 issue. But now that's quite difficult for a teacher, and this is a challenge going forward because you're having questions, which as we know are delayed, and you can't speak over them. So you have to sort of find a good rhythm where you've got the online kids asking questions, your classes asking the real-time questions, real live questions, just managing that. We do have one staff member who has an earphone onto his phone, and he uses the phone as the microphone, and then he's listening only to those students at home, and he's engaging at the same time with the students in the classroom. And I think going forward, those are the sorts of teachers that we're going to need. Those are the skills that teachers are going to need to be able to do those things, two things at once. So what we did then is as we went into this hard lockdown, we prioritized our matrics. And we didn't change much with our matrics. The matric teachers stayed similar where we could. But what we did do in our core subjects is we appointed the subject heads to be the teachers for matrics. And in most cases, our subject heads do take the senior grades, the matrics. So that was pretty much normal. But we kept the similar class size, and we kept similar times for them. So in other words, we ran them on a 50-minute lesson. That was fine. But then for the rest of the grades, what we did is that we took other teachers and we redistributed them, and we had one expert in our first additional language, in English and in maths, so that we divide the department and each department would look after a particular grade. That was made possible because we soon realized, as I've got that picture in the bottom right, that kids weren't putting their faces on anymore. They didn't want to show themselves. In fact, we only see Smarties when we teach now. So it didn't matter if we were teaching 100 Smarties or the normal 20, 25 Smarties. So we could get a lot more content across very quickly without worrying about class size, because when you're on the internet, who cares how big it is? And so we moved them to 50-minute lessons, and we did double lessons in some cases with them online, with some breaks in between, to take a break. And then when we came back, what we had to do, and we did this during our lockdown, is we broke some walls down in our classrooms, so that we took 2 single classrooms and we made them into a big classroom. And this obviously immediately enabled us to get more kids in according to the COVID regulations, with 1.5 meters between the desks. So that was the important thing. Going forward, we've learned a big lesson here, though, because we think that leveraging technology. So I know people talk about online school and, in school, sort of brick and mortar school, and then they talk about blended learning. And I think we're leaning to that blended learning, but I add this word leveraging technology. So what we're going to see going forward is perhaps we start looking at opportunities where we say, okay, we only need one teacher. Just use maths literacy as an example. And often with maths literacy, you have very strong all the way down to very weak students. And maybe that maths literacy teacher only needs to see the strong kids once a week in order to keep that relationship. But in the other times, they could still be operating the way we have during this lockdown, where they're watching pre-recorded videos, where they're seeing worksheets, and they're actually working on their own in another venue. And I think that's going to certainly help on the bottom line for schools in terms of money. Here was our big drawback, was strengthening relationships. Tracey touched on this too. Teachers don't go into teaching because they just want to deliver content. 9 times out of 10, a teacher goes in because they love teaching. They love being with students, and they like to make a difference in whatever way. So we struggled here. And so again, we tried to keep some sort of interaction going in our grade assemblies. We then sent out a survey to kids, and we asked kids what did they want to do, and we came up with fun ideas to do. So for example, grade 8s would be baking pancakes on a Friday and sending us pictures. We had various of these things just to try and keep the relationship going, because this is where we've lost. We've struggled here. However, when you've engaged with the students on WhatsApp, and when you've returned some of their work to them on the Google Classroom, you can get particularly, just want to find the right word here, but you can get particularly close with the student because you're able to really engage at quite a deep level. So we discovered that whilst we were struggling in the traditional sense of relationships, because we were not seeing this non-verbal communication. I mean, often you stand in front of a class and you can see, you know, little Jane is looking sad, and then you're interacting. That skill's now gone. That opportunity's gone. You're just seeing smarties. But when you're writing them in a letter, Tracey mentioned phoning them. But when we were writing comments to them or we were engaging with them one-on-one in WhatsApp, we were getting a very deep reply. And that took us by surprise. So, yes, we lost some of these relationships in the traditional sense, and we grew some of them differently. And this is going to be some way that we're going to have to look at that going forward, that sort of relationships. Yeah, so what do I think of the future? How do I see school looking in the future? So I just put this together because I think going forward, this is, in my view, the utopia, and maybe being like those French artists, Craig, trying to throw something across there. Here's what I think. I think, first of all, education is going to be incredibly personal. It's not going to be en masse like we used to. This little boy with his phone there, and it's sort of an illusion of a teacher coming up, and the clever glasses that he's wearing there with his antenna. Technology is going to change. We're going to have all sorts of new and wonderful cell phones and then tablets, and the new things going to come out, whatever those are. What it means is that it's going to be focused on the individual. That individual is going to be able to choose content from wherever. Now, initially we thought, oh, brilliant, we can get Khan videos and all sorts, and we can throw it at the kids. What we discovered was the children didn't want to watch Khan videos. They still wanted to watch Mrs. Smith, whom they knew. There was sort of still an attachment that existed there. So I think that, there's still definitely a place for teachers in this, but it's going to have to be a little bit different, and we're going to compete here differently. And on the top left, I've included just one of the many international syllabuses. I really believe that we are going to move into some sort of international way of teaching. I don't think that we're only going to be stuck with, the National Senior Certificate and IB. I think we're going to be looking at offering something international. It doesn't mean that our entire syllabus will shift there, but we've discovered that we've gained time. When you line up for a class, there's 10 minutes. I mean, I exaggerate, but your assemblies take time. All of these things take time. When you're doing it online, all of that time is condensed and you've sort of gained a lot of time. So there could actually be time now to offer a course, let's say from Harvard, and you do an entrepreneurial course, and that's something you can offer as a school to differentiate yourself. The bottom left there, this is about being connected. We're all connected. You can look on the TV, on YouTube, on Facebook. Everybody in the world is wearing masks. This thing affects all of us. So we have to then link with the world, and we've got to prepare our students for a world that they can find a skill and do anywhere in the world. Top right there, I've got the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Well, I think if COVID taught us one thing, is that we really have to look after our world. We have finite resources. The UN has got those 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Our teaching, certainly at Thomas More, has got to aim towards solving some real life problems. And all of our curriculum has got to adapt to that, I think. Bottom right, I've got just an example there of a mentor. Young people still need adults in their lives. They still need the real flesh and blood adult. And somebody leading them and somebody that they can talk to. And we've seen this as being something where we're going to shift from class teachers, we're going to shift to mentors, where we're actually going to divide our classes much smaller. We're going to go to about 10 or 15 for a mentor. We think that if you are offline, you still need that personal contact. You still need somebody to go to. So I think that we're going to need that. In the digital world, we still will need this connection with the adult. And yeah, just my last slide then, Craig, is how do I think teachers are going to respond to this, and how do I think students are going to respond to my vision? I think if teachers know that they can still make a difference and that they're given the skills to do that, I think we're going to be just fine. I think then they'll adapt, as we've seen, absolutely fine. Students, I think we're going to see if they find that they belong to a place, to an institution, and if they find purpose in what they're doing. So if they're doing the the SDGs, for example, and they see why they're learning something and that they can make a difference and belong, that's fine. This word belong, I just wanted to just touch on for a while, because, you know, often you think of a school as a place where you go to, whereas in this lockdown period, we've sort of learned that a school is not just a place you go to, it's actually a feeling. It's actually an emotion. So when it comes to technology, you can leverage that a lot, because, you know, you send them videos, you send them clips, you send them, you know, these nice little heartfelt videos and whatever related to your school. Kids feel connected to that thing, which is no longer tangible. So they don't have to stand on the first team hockey field and feel like they belong. They belong now on a much more personal level, and a much more, I call it an E level, but it's not tangible anymore. It's much more of the feeling. So yeah, Craig, that's how we've walked through. I think some of the nasty surprises perhaps going forward is that I think our economy is in not great shape. And I think as independent schools, we're going to be under a lot of pressure to do more with our rands if we get those rands in. And so, you know, that's me there, Craig.
Right. Thanks very much, Stephen, for that. Very interesting. Again, a whole lot of very interesting points that you've raised here. And I mean, not totally dissimilar to some of the things that Tracey was sharing. So I think absolutely very interesting. Just to pick up on a couple, and then I'll just put a couple of questions to you, and then while I'm doing that, if you've got any questions, anyone out there, you can pop them in the Q&A, and then we will direct those to our panelists. Both of you have mentioned the whole concept of being adaptable. I think that's probably been a big lesson. None of us know what this future's like, and often maybe as teachers, that's not such an easy thing. You know, one thing about teaching is it's pretty orderly. You know, you've got lessons, and you've got classrooms, and you know the famous old Sir Ken Robinson story about industrial era model, and that model taught us about a very, very structured thing. And we've for a long time realized, no, we've got to change, we've got to become more organic. And we've seen that if we're going to move into this new education age, adaptability is going to be absolutely huge. And that's adaptation for the teachers, it's adaptation for the students. And I think you both picked that up a lot. The other thing you both picked up a lot on is connection being so important. And connection in a way has changed, and what it means. As you say, talk about the matrix losing out on certain things, and I know Tracey mentioned fascinating things that you still wanted to, and so do you, Stephen, about you would still do art, you would still do drama, you still have to do almost the tactile things. And I love what you said there, Stephen, that they didn't want Mr. Khan, they wanted Mrs. Smith. Yeah, you know, and I think sometimes we imagine the world is that we will get this perfect video of this perfect maths lesson from this perfect teacher, and we will deliver that to the student. And academically, you'd say, well, yeah, that's going to be great. That just perfectly shows them how to learn that concept. But there's more to it than that. There's the personality. There's like, oh, that's Mrs. Smith. Oh, look how she's got the twitch in her eye or whatever. And I think all of that adds to the learning. And I think that's come out as really important. It's going to be important that that element is part of us going forward. Right, so what I'm going to do is just going to put a couple of questions to both of you, and we just chat about these. Tracey, you mentioned something to do with your assessments, etc. And obviously teaching and assessment are very integrated. Do you think the way that we are assessing is going to have to change going forward? What are your views on how assessment's going to work as we move forward into a sort of new era in the next sort of 5 years?
I think it definitely will need to change, and in fact it has already, and I could see that with our staff, that it couldn't just be about a test and a control test. So we needed some of those thrown in, but we needed to be pretty creative in terms of the kinds of tests that we would have. And they were, I mean, they experimented with all kinds of things and in all different ways. And it does make you reflect on what assessment is about. And that we don't have to be quite so mark driven. It's not about that. It's about, yes, the progress, the development, where people are at, how they're understanding. And so that kind of assessment just happened in such a different way already. It meant our reports changed, how we reported, what we've reported. And as I say, I can actually see that changing actually, because there's just been so much good in it, that it's not like, okay, well, when this is over, we'll just go back to how we did it before. The challenge, of course, is that we always are preparing pupils for grade 12, but certainly we can hopefully look forward to some changes there too, would be rather nice. Just something simple like pupils now type so much. Perhaps some pupils would prefer to type their matric exams and as opposed to handwrite them, and maybe that being an option. So we obviously can work backwards from that, but we still have so much freedom, even if we've got to meet, sort of grade 12 requirements in the other grades. And it's been exciting to see the staff engage with that and change that mindset of it's all about, gathering a grade book full of marks. It doesn't have to be about that. We're having very varied assessments. You're not just about tests. Alternate assessments certainly are, what we've been doing for quite a long time, but even more so, we've taken yet another step forward in gathering information on learning. And as I say, we'll keep doing that.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I work at a university, and it's obviously been a big thing for universities to rethink, wow, how do we suddenly assess these people? How do we do this? And Stephen picked up on a thing. He mentioned that, this is my phrase, but he was saying the same thing. When we started this whole lockdown and this whole new, we tried to copy paste. We tried to bring the old and digitize it into the new. And then we realized, gee, like he was saying, I'd wear the tie and I'd do everything the same. And then you realize, some of those things just aren't effective anymore. And I think the same applies with assessment. We did it on paper. It was summative, and let's just now somehow get this online. And we've always known for a long time, assessment's formative. Assessment's not just an assessment, it's part of learning. And I think once we understand that becomes a huge eye-opener. Now it starts to think, well, how do we do this? And we've been forced to think of new and interesting ways. How do you assess maybe when the person's remote and they're not in the room? And I think that's been interesting. But it does raise the question, I'll put this one to you, Stephen. And Tracey did pick up this. Schools and everything is adapting, but do you think still everything seems to work towards, whether it's the normal national government one or the private school, IEB, are working towards this end goal that's sort of legislated? And now if government hasn't changed and they've still got, you will complete this much and do this much, how's this thing ever going to get right? How are we ever going to have the flexibility to change how we teach and assess if the top level down is saying, well, we've got this thing and you've got to achieve that? Any ideas on that?
Well, I mean, look, as Thomas More, we took a real big risk with our grade 9s. We actually redesigned the curriculum such that we got them to choose what they wanted to do. Umalusi was not happy about that, as you can imagine. But Tracey's picked up on this too. Within the independent schools, we do try and we do expand. And, we're not rigidly set by whatever the government restrictions are. But what you're talking about is that last exam, the matric exam. And so we took an early decision when COVID happened to really prioritize the matric. So we kept it all similar and we didn't disrupt them, because for them to have learned a new way that would have been asking a huge amount. And, we wanted to get them over that. So, yes, I hear what you're saying, that the government hasn't changed. But this is what I'm telling you. I think the government will change, but I also think that within us as independent schools, we will do things like sustainable development. We will introduce international curriculums that will tag on to what we do. We will just make it richer and fuller, as has been the case in all independent schools forever, because we've got that freedom and we've got the resources, which is a very key one. But if I could, Craig, for a moment, and just touch on something Tracey was talking about in terms of reports. We did another crazy thing which worked really well for us, is that we sent out our reports on a Google form this time for term 2. And we actually asked the student to write how they had experienced it, and we asked the parent to write how they experienced it, and then we collated all of that. And so when the parent read, they read what the students had discovered, what various teachers had discovered, and then the parent. So you had this completely new way of writing a report where actually the kid wrote a third of the report themselves. And so that was, and at this kind of time, you can be sort of experimental, so interesting times.
Yeah, but you see, that's exactly it. I think that's the sort of experimentation that we want to do, because you would never have done that before. And now all of a sudden you're trying something. And I think what you're saying as well is, is while there's regulation, there's government, and we understand that, there's going to be a push and a pull here, you know, and often legislation responds to what's changes. It eventually has to, and I think we're going to see that increasingly. Just one other thing I want to pick up that you mentioned, Stephen, you talked about how, and this is looking at the future, that you've actually made some physical changes, you know, like classroom sizes and timetabling. Do you think the future, now let's say 5 years time, do you think schooling will be different? Like you talked about having like one teacher that sort of dealt with a specific group. Do you think those are going to be the real changes that are going to be in the future, that it's going to be maybe a bigger class that's handled in remotely, or what's your view on that? Some of the sort of physical changes that might take place.
I do think going forward that we are going to have bigger classes, but I think that's why we've, in our sense, we've linked it with mentorship too, because you'll have to have somebody walking the journey with them. So, you know, that COVID's taught us that when you're on a Zoom or a Google Meet like we are, you're just seeing a whole lot of smarties. So when you're giving that content out, you can give it to thousands actually, because you lack this physical interaction that's happening. You're just seeing the little smarties. And so yeah, I do think that going forward, we are going to have a master teacher, and you're going to end up having an assistant teacher, which like I am now at the moment for one of our teachers who has a comorbidity. I'm in there, my job is discipline, and I'm really checking that the kids are doing the work. She's explaining the work, and I'm being able to do that. But you can see from a cost point of view how much better that would be. In terms of going forward, though, I think that you would land up opening your classrooms, but there'd be moments when your kids would put earphones on. Now, you know, I've been head of discipline for a long time, so cell phones in class and earphones, those are like big no-nos for me. And I've changed, I really have. There's been this Damascus moment, because I want you to have an earphone, because that is going to allow the teacher to go, right, those 4 kids that you've got it, there's the exercise, pick up and go for it, and let me carry on with these within the same venue. And that's exciting for me. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, gone are the days of me policing cell phones.
It's funny, other things we used to think were so bad. Yeah, yes. I saw a little clip the other day. It used to be no phones at school, and now it's no school without phones. You know,
I agree with that.
That's how the mindset's changed. It's absolutely fascinating. And I think Keith Gibson said maybe more use of master teachers and more teaching assistants versus more teachers. And I think that's basically what you've talked about, that we might move towards master teachers, and that's a different model. And that means that we've got to, so Tracey, then coming to you, do you think that we've used this term adaptable, and we've picked up lots of things about teachers, you know, fear of being on camera, being adaptable, being able to handle all sorts of multiple levels. Do you think teachers are going to have to change quite a bit going forward? You know, for a while we've been sort of okay to be a specialist in history, and I did my thing in grade 7. Do you think we're going to have to teach, how teachers are going to have to respond to this in the future?
I know they most certainly are going to keep needing to adapt and change, and at a greater rate. But fortunately, we've been thrust into making that change. And so now it's actually just to keep that momentum going. And so it's to stop now. I mean, we obviously sort of COVID isn't going to end at the 31st of December. It's going to still be there, but it's now how we want to take control of the situation as opposed to doing emergency crisis kind of management.
And so have you been surprised or not surprised by teachers' ability to adapt? Have you found that while they adapted, I didn't expect they would, or while they didn't really adapt, that's what I expected?
No, they've adapted more than I thought that they would be able to.
Interesting.
And I mean, as Stephen has mentioned, they continue to manage and juggle. You know, each class presents a different situation. Children at home, maybe devices that don't work here, there. Maybe you've got to find at school, but there's load shedding where people are at home. And so it's just been phenomenal what they've actually taken on. And just, so much that's very structured in terms of what they've adapted to, but then also just that spur of the moment, on the moment managing that particular class. And so I don't think that, I don't see a problem at all with them continuing to adapt. And now
I think that's interesting, because I think
we went over that activation energy barrier. Exactly. And so now, yes, we can get on with it.
You know, and I think we thought that we couldn't adapt it. And I think that's one thing this crisis has taught us. I mean, I'm on meetings on Zoom 24/7 almost, it feels like, whereas I wasn't really prior to that. And it just became a natural part of your life. And I think maybe that's been an interesting thing for teachers. Just a quick one to anyone from Lynn. Has anyone done an oral assessment, so interviewing a student about certain content to test the understanding with the ability to record the evidence or a way to look back? Has any of you done an oral assessment at all?
We've done orals where, you know, and instead of doing the speech in front of you, they're doing, you know, on YouTube or something, and they send it to you. But I haven't engaged one-on-one in an oral way because, you know, that would take a lot of time. Actually, that's an interesting thought.
Tracey, you done anything as live orals with students or in terms of assessment?
In an informal way, yes, and obviously getting a sort of a discussion mark almost is what our staff called that. And so, yes, just getting a general sense, and it was very much oral and engaging in an oral way and actually coming away with a mark for that discussion and that oral engagement.
Okay, very good. Right, picking up on some of these, Lynn says, are many parents opting not to pay because the learners aren't going to school? How are we going to keep the institutions funded in the future? Sure. Tricky question. I mean, and this is a thing not only for schools, it's for higher education as part of the whole thing. The model's changing. Where the content and knowledge is coming from is changing, you know, and so the whole thing has to be rethought. Maybe it comes to what you were saying, Stephen, maybe classes can be bigger, people can be taught at home. If you watched our panel from last time, one of the schools there was involved in actually taking all their content and delivering it online and coming up with a different revenue stream potentially. Thoughts on where the future of this might be headed?
Yeah, I think schools that open up online offerings are going to get a revenue stream. I think it's going to open up opportunities to engage with beyond your province borders, maybe even outside of your country. I think that's one. I think that when it comes to this question about whether parents will pay, that's why we were all adapted so quickly. Certainly within the private school, didn't take much for us to see that we better get this content out and we better start showing we're doing something, which there was that pressure on us. I think we did. I think another way of the model being funded, and perhaps the same with Tracey, is that we've obviously saved in sport and we've saved in drama, etc. So many of our schools are giving money back to the parents where we can. Obviously, COVID and all the PPE has been huge, but there is actually this giving back. And I mean, some schools have gone even as far as cutting salaries and having salary sacrifices, and so it's not a pleasant environment right now from a salary and those sort of conversations.
Absolutely. Bridget says, how have the pre-COVID-19 anxious learners coped with online school? And if you want to pick up those who were anxious before this, how have they been coping? Tracey, how about you?
I think it actually depends on the nature of the anxiety. Strangely enough, certain children that are particularly anxious almost fared better at home because it depends on where the source of anxiety is. And for some of them, sort of being more social and depending upon, yes, as I say, the anxiety that they have, they actually thrived at home. And then, of course, I mean, I think the anxious child that's where you've got all those WhatsApps and messages and things perhaps at all hours of the day. And you do need to reassure them just as you have to do at school. And that's where just, various forms of communication. And I think you get there. In the first week or two, there were definitely anxious parents, anxious children. And once they settled into the rhythm of it, actually, there wasn't really that problem anymore. And setting boundaries was important. And Stephen spoke about that as well. We needed to do that too. Because they were just working day and night, all hours, and that was fine. But we needed to just protect the staff a bit in terms of that and just put some boundaries in place.
It's interesting, I've always said when it comes to trying to change a school to bring in technology, we often think, well, it's, train the teachers, but there's a whole lot of people that need a mind change. It's your teachers, it's obviously your school management, then it's your students themselves and how they respond to this, then it's your parents, and then it's the rest of the world, because everyone's a teacher, as you know, or thinks they're a teacher and know how to teach. So they've also got an opinion on how you're teaching, and it's a massive thing. And dealing with levels of from emotional things, psychological things, connection things, to the technological and the learning, so it's a massive undertaking. Ingrid says, I like the idea of master teachers. The assistant teachers can learn the job and upskill more quickly. It may also work to use the skills of retired teachers. And yeah, that opens up all sorts of fascinating possibilities of who's going to be teaching. I mean, there's some great teachers out there, and maybe they brought in, and maybe this becomes part of the model to support things. Sia Bonga says, do you think public schools will be able to adapt as well as independent schools, considering the fact that most of them are resource challenged? I don't know if any of you got a view on that. I know you're not in a public school, but...
Well, but that little model that we're running now, where that comorbidity teacher is you know, in another venue and I'm being the assistant, that when I'm standing there, I think, wow, wouldn't this be an amazing opportunity if schools like ours partnered with less advantaged schools, and we could then have the teacher teaching, knowing that we've got a teacher assistant who's teaching maybe 5 or 6 classes down somewhere else. But the point is that we'd have to put in that technology. But if we had the screen, and if we had that opportunity of knowing that you had a good teacher assistant, we could upskill. And you know, this is something I think the government should look at. Technology is not just about everybody having a tablet, as has happened, because that to me is not the greatest solution. You need some backup and some training on it. Well, this model, I think, has potential.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracey, I know you mentioned, and I'm going to just deal with Mary's question here, that you started off sort of not on any particular platform, and I thought that was very interesting, because I'm a great believer in being very careful of letting the technology lead the education. I'm all about the pedagogy, and any technology will ultimately do it for you if you're driven by pedagogy. But that doesn't mean you can't be on the platform. So Stephen, and then while you're using the Google type platform, using Tracey using the Microsoft. So the question that Marie says here, should the students not all be on the same device, i.e. Chromebooks? You know, do you think it's then good to have, okay, whatever the platform, whatever the technology, we are going Google and you're going to all have Chromebooks, or we're going Microsoft and you're going to have, or we're being Apple. What do you think about that? That standardization, is that important?
A little bit of it is required. It certainly helps, I think, to manage, and in terms of helping people and supporting them from an IT point of view. But yeah, nowadays things are so interchangeable. You know, and even if you don't perhaps have Teams, as in you don't have the Microsoft package, you know, licensed, well, you can access it via, and you know, sort of via the internet and an email, you know, on a link. And so you actually can work your way around that. I don't think you have to be limited. Certainly we guide our pupils in terms of when they do ask us, because parents do, in terms of what devices to purchase and how we make use of them. And when I suppose when I spoke about the online platform, we'd actually looked at quite a few different ones. I mean, there are lots of people offering lots of different things, and we weren't quite sure where we wanted to go. And so we thought, now hang on, before taking that really big step that costs lots of money, lots of investment, and also not easy to step back from it. Let's actually dabble almost with what we have as part of our license. You know, we've got all the Microsoft offerings. And so there's Teams right there for us. And so let's start to play with that. And as I say, we did that from very much people going, oh my word, this is great. Think what we can do. What, you know, it came from them. And yeah. So that really moved us along quite nicely and in a very non-stressful, threatening kind of way.
And I think that was really interesting, Tracey, because you talked about it was almost like you played, and that helped the people understand to be motivated. And I think that's always important. Teachers' buy-in comes from them. Oh, wow, that works. Oh, that was quite fun. You know, rather than, and in all my work with school over the years, I've seen that even if management decides and got a vision and tries to stuff it down, it doesn't work. The best thing is when there's a motivation. When the motivation comes from inside, you know the why of this, you know, and I think that's part of that adaptation. It's part of the, as you said, this evolving, and I think that's really important. I see Thea Ellis says, yeah, we do have public schools who have partnered with rural schools and who assist with maths and English classes. And I think, coming back to what I said to Stephen earlier, you know, where will we find more funding? Also links with the possibility of bringing in retired teachers, starting to offer offerings into rural schools as part of our community work. You know, I think the opportunities with technology are huge that you know, we've always spoken about, you get your sort of like Model C school linking with the independent school, and yeah, maybe that was sort of tenuous, but now those links can actually be quite strong.
Oh, yeah.
Sharing content, you can be sharing. So maybe that school doesn't have a great maths teacher. Well, we can make a plan. I mean, it's literally going to require getting a stream in there or something.
But even more than that, Craig, because you still need the connection, you still need the relationship. The best part about this kind of idea that you're talking about is that your teacher would visit that community so that it wouldn't just be the Khan video game. There would be this connection. They would see that. Once there's that connection, I think then this will take off quite a bit there. And leveraging technology. I just wanted to talk about Spark schools, which I found interesting when I understood this. In their schools, what they do is they actually they really do leverage technology by saying, for example, at their grade, I think it's their grade 5 and 6 level, where they take history, what do they call that, the social sciences, and they really deliver that content via technology. And the kids answer everything there, and that takes away an entire teacher. Now, that has enabled those schools to really be able to position themselves where they can, where it's affordable by the working class people. And that's where we should all be looking, to leverage technology, not get rid of the teacher, just leverage it a little bit more so that one teacher can do more because they've got the backup of the computer.
Absolutely. Right, so we're just about out of time, and these conversations go far so quickly. But what I want to do is, if you had one takeaway, I'm going to start with you, Tracey. There's one thing you want to say, well, people are sitting, we listen, I'm all on to, like, is there one thing to take away? I know we said lots of amazing things. If you had to say, this is my one takeaway for everyone about the reimagining education, what would you say yours is, Tracey?
I'd say that every aspect of schooling is affected and changed now. And it's an incredibly exciting space. And I say that in terms of teaching, learning, marketing, communications, everything that we do now is actually quite different. We've not wanted to lose certain events, certain ways of communicating. So we found innovative ways to share that while we have, online and people at home. And we're also a boarding school in the high school, part boarding, part day scholar. And often there are many parents that can't get to school and miss out on many events and things that we have. And now we don't even think twice now about recording, streaming, using flip books, whatever it takes, in fact, to continue that communication and not to leave anybody out, in essence. And I think that's, really great. And as I say, therefore, every aspect, in fact, it's not just about the teaching and learning. Everything has now changed going forward.
Adapt, innovate, communicate. Right, thank you, Tracey. Fantastic. And Stephen, your takeaway for everyone, what would it be?
My big takeaway is that it is such a privilege to work in a profession that for hundreds of years have done it in a certain way, and literally within a few weeks turned this whole thing around. And that's because the teachers that we have are educated people now, people who are innovative and creative and have that passion for children, that heart. So my big takeaway is what a wonderful profession that I'm part of, that was able to do what it was that it did in such a short amount of time. And 2020 is definitely the year of the teacher.
Absolutely, the year of the teacher. I just want to finish off so that I can finish on our time. Melody said, what about teacher training, especially for those teachers who are not tech savvy? ACT is a brilliant portal for teachers to learn about teaching effectively for technology. Thank you, Melody, for the plug. Obviously, our passion has been to try and make teaching more than just about the technology. It is about making it engaging. I've just finished a big research project where we've been doing research of people during this time and their online teaching. And the biggest thing that comes out over and over and over again, it wasn't engaging. And without that engagement, and that's what we've been talking about a lot, it is that human touch. It's feeling part of it. It cannot be. And there's one thing, and I know Stephen mentioned this, that some of the things that you bring as a previous teacher into the new world, they either are made better or they're made worse. And unfortunately, if you're a really boring teacher and you put on a screen this size, that can really be a problem. And so obviously engaging is really important. So I just want to finish with one last little thing. If I can quickly share my screen. There we go. And right, there's my screen shared. Right. And that is just, oh, there we go. I was going to do one more little question, but actually I'm not going to worry about the question at the moment. I just wanted to offer this. For any schools who are keen to find out how to be a little bit more effective with online teaching specifically and with blended teaching, what I found to be very effective, and I think Tracey and Stephen have both said this, you need to experience things to actually know what really works. And so prior to lockdown, what I would do is I'd arrive at a school and run a workshop to try and show schools how you can really be effective with whatever technology it is if you apply the right pedagogies. I've now since changed that, and I run an online workshop related to that. But what I'm going to do is, if you are interested as a school, and so I'm going to do this for 5 schools, but I can't do it for many, and your school is going to attend. So that doesn't mean there's just 2 from your school who are going to come. But so we're going to make the effort. I want you to see the impact. And you're interested, there is a link there. You can either scan that little code, or you can go to bit.ly/activebl for active blended learning, and fill in your details, and I'll let you know, and I'll see if we can arrange a time that I can run an online workshop with you. It's just an hour. But the whole idea is to show you how you can be so effective in online and blended teaching when you apply the right pedagogies and the right approaches, and it just changes the whole game. And all of a sudden, you know, it gets so exciting for the teachers and for the students. So if you're interested in that, just go across to that link, bit.ly/activebl. Right, so from me, I just want to say a big thank you, especially to my 2 panelists, to Stephen and Tracey. Thank you for making the time to join us. It really was a privilege to have you. Obviously, this is an ongoing conversation. None of us know where the future, we are like those artists trying to paint it. I've been absolutely fascinated by what Stephen and Tracey said, and what your schools are doing at the moment. It's not exactly the same, which is, I find that really interesting. And where we see it going, it's not exactly the same, but it's just similar. And I think the one thing that we've all seen, and I think you'd probably both agree, it's not going to go back. The 10,000 hours have been spent by students, by parents, by teachers, by everyone. We're not going back. And if we think we are, we're fooling ourselves, and we have to prepare for the future that's very uncertain, but also very exciting. And so I think we have a wonderful time ahead of us. So thank you again to everyone. Thank you to all the people that joined us. We had a whole lot of people. Thank you, everyone. And again, thank you very much, Stephen and Tracey. And hope you all have a lovely evening going forward, wherever you are, morning or day. So thanks, everyone. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Craig. Thanks, Tracey.
Cheers, guys. Thank you very much.
And to everybody for joining us.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Ciao.